I remember the restaurant first, not because it was beautiful, though it was. It sat in downtown Indianapolis with polished brass handles on the front doors, cream-colored walls, and small glass votives flickering on every table. The waiters moved so quietly, it made everyone else lower their voices without thinking. It was the kind of place people describe as tasteful when what they really mean is expensive. Crisp napkins, heavy silverware, soft lighting, the sort of room where nobody expects anything ugly to happen in public. That was part of the problem. Ugly things often survive in places where people assume they do not belong. I got there early, which was normal for me. I have always believed that arriving 10 or 15 minutes ahead of time prevents trouble later. My late husband used to say, I built my life around avoiding small, preventable delays. He was not entirely wrong. I was 59 then, living alone in Carmel, just north of the city, in the same brick house where I had raised my daughter. I still parked straight, locked my car twice, and kept hard copies of the utility bills in a drawer labeled by month. That evening I wore a slate blue dress I had not taken out in a while. Nothing dramatic. Long sleeves, modest neckline, low heels I could forget I was wearing. I carried an old linen handkerchief in my purse, embroidered with the initials E.M. for my mother, Eleanor May. I could not have explained then why that mattered to me. I only know that it did. My daughter Claire arrived a few minutes later on her husband's arm. She smiled when she saw me, but it was the kind of smile that looked arranged rather than felt. Too careful at the edges. I noticed the small things first. I always do. Her lipstick was slightly darker than usual. Her hair was pinned up more tightly than she normally wore it. It was late spring, warm enough for sleeveless dresses and sandals, but Claire had on a thin cream cardigan buttoned all the way to the wrist. "Mom," she said, leaning in to kiss my cheek. Her voice was light, her eyes were not. "You okay, sweetheart?" I asked. She gave a soft little laugh. "Just tired." At the time, I let that answer stand. Later, I understood that tired can mean almost anything when someone is trying not to tell the truth in public. Daniel greeted me next. My son-in-law, tall, well-groomed, handsome in the polished way. Some men become once money has softened all their rough edges. He worked in commercial development, something involving contracts and land acquisitions, and large projects that always seemed to exist in renderings until they suddenly did not. He wore good suits, kept clean fingernails, and spoke in that measured tone some men use when they want to sound reasonable no matter what they are saying. He shook my hand instead of hugging me. "Margaret," he said, "good to see you." It was never Mom, or even Margaret with warmth behind it. Just the word itself. Flat. Managed. Then his parents came in. Harold Mercer was loud before he reached the table. I could hear him from halfway across the dining room, laughing at something he had said himself. He had a broad red face, a silver watch he liked to show when he lifted his hand, and the kind of confidence that comes from going through life without being corrected often enough. His wife, Susan, walked a step behind him. Quiet grey dress, low heels, shoulders slightly rounded, as if she had spent years trying to take up less space than she naturally did. We sat. Menus were opened. Water was poured. A waiter asked if we wanted to start with drinks. Nothing seemed broken yet. That is what still stays with me. Right up until it breaks, a thing can look completely intact. Claire ordered red wine. It was a tiny choice, not even a real decision, just a preference. The kind of harmless thing that disappears into the air every day in restaurants all over the country. Daniel looked up from the menu. "Red?" he said. Claire blinked. "Yes. I'm ordering halibut." There was a pause. Not a long one. Long enough. "Oh," she said. "I can change it." He did not look at the waiter. He looked at her. You never think ahead. The waiter froze with his pen over the pad. I remember that clearly. A young man, maybe mid-20s, hair slicked back too hard, expression caught between politeness and concern. I stepped in, because that is what women like me are trained to do. Smooth the edge, reduce the friction, save the evening. It's just wine, I said lightly. I'm sure the fish will survive. Harold let out a laugh from the back of his throat. Daniel's right, he said. Nobody pays attention anymore. Used to be a wife knew what her husband was having before she ordered anything. Susan kept her eyes on her menu. Claire lowered hers too. That was when I saw it. She reached toward the bread plate, and the sleeve of her cardigan slipped back half an inch. Maybe an inch. Enough to show the inside of her wrist. Fading yellow bruises, one darker mark near the bone. The shape of pressure, not clumsiness. Not a bump into a counter, not a door frame. My chest went cold so quickly it almost felt clean. Claire, I said. She pulled the sleeve down immediately. It's nothing. But a mother knows the difference between nothing and something someone is begging you not to name. Dinner continued because public life has a brutal habit of continuing. Orders were placed. Bread was passed. Harold talked too loudly about real estate taxes and how nobody wanted to work anymore. Daniel added his part where appropriate. Susan barely spoke. Claire smiled when spoken to and did not touch much of her meal once it arrived. I watched her, not openly, not dramatically, quietly. How she flinched, just slightly, when Daniel leaned across her to reach for water. How she apologized when the waiter had to ask her to repeat herself. How she checked Daniel's face before answering anyone else. Some people mistake silence for peace. That sentence formed in my mind somewhere between the entree and dessert, though I did not say it aloud then. I only sat there and felt it settle into place. Dessert is what people remember when they retell this kind of story, because it sounds too absurd to belong to ordinary life. Cheesecake instead of tiramisu. That was all. A simple kitchen mistake. The waiter set the wrong plate in front of Claire and started apologizing before she had even opened her mouth. It's fine, Claire said softly. Really, I can eat this. Daniel did not let the waiter leave. My wife ordered tiramisu. The waiter nodded nervously. I'm so sorry, sir. I can replace it right away. It doesn't matter, Claire whispered. He turned to her. It matters. His voice never rose much at first. That was the chilling part. Everything came out cold, controlled, deliberate. A man who wanted the room to understand that if anyone here was being unreasonable, it was not him. Daniel, she said, almost under her breath. Please. You do this all the time. Do what? Fold, settle, accept whatever gets put in front of you. People at the next table were looking by then, not openly, sideways. The way decent people do when they are hoping they will not be forced into a moral decision before coffee. Please stop, Claire said. And then he reached out and grabbed a fistful of her hair, fast, efficient, as if he had done it before and knew exactly how much force to use. The room went quiet. That phrase gets overused, but in that moment it was exact. The room did not merely become quieter. It went quiet. Forks stopped. Glasses stopped clinking. Even the music seemed to fall back, though I am sure it did not. Claire made a sound I had never heard from her before. Not a scream. Something smaller and worse. A trapped sound. One hand flew to the table, the other to his wrist, but only by instinct. Her body already knew resistance would cost more. And Harold, from directly across the table, said, clear as a bell, "That's how you handle it." I still hear that sometimes. That's how you handle it. Susan did not move. She stared at the tablecloth with the expression of someone waiting for bad weather to pass over a roof she no longer trusted. I stood up. I wish I could tell you it was courage, clean and immediate. It was not. It was a lifetime of delayed recognition arriving all at once. Every odd silence. Every cancelled visit. Every excuse Claire had made over the last few years. Every time I had decided not to press because pressing felt impolite. I stood because if I remained seated, I would have become part of the furniture in that room. Take your hand off my daughter, I said. Not shouted, said. Daniel let go because public image still mattered to him then. Claire collapsed inward, chin tucked, shoulders shaking. She was crying, but still trying not to let anyone see it. That effort hurt me more than the tears themselves. Margaret, Daniel said, smoothing his cuff as if he were the injured party. You're misunderstanding the situation. Harold barked out a laugh. Sit down. Husband and wife have a moment, and suddenly everybody's making a federal case out of it. I looked at Claire. Stand up. She shook her head once, barely. Claire, Mom, please. And there it was. Not anger, not denial, fear. Not fear of me. Fear of what would happen later if I kept going. At that point, I made the first decision that mattered. I did not throw water in his face. I did not scream for the manager. I did not lunge across the table like television teaches people to do when they want to look brave. I chose procedure over reaction. I asked for the check, even though we had barely touched dessert. I took out my card. I paid my portion and Claire's portion. I stood beside her chair and said, quietly enough that only she could hear, My house is open, day or night, no questions. You understand me? Her hands were shaking in her lap. Mom, please just go. So I went. That part is harder for some people to understand than standing up in the first place. But by then I had seen enough to know this was not a scene. It was a structure. And structures do not collapse because one person raises her voice in a restaurant. They collapse when pressure reaches the right points. Outside, it had just started raining. The sidewalks shone under the streetlights, and the valet line looked blurred at the edges. I sat in my car with both hands on the steering wheel and did not start the engine for a full 5 minutes. Maybe 10. I am not sure anymore. I took the handkerchief out of my purse and held it in my fist. Then I drove home and began, quietly, to think in terms of records. The first memory that came back to me later was from a hardware store parking lot in Fishers, maybe 5 years earlier. Claire had met me there on a Saturday morning because I was buying tomato cages and she happened to be nearby. She was still working then, still herself in ways I did not appreciate enough at the time. Her hair was loose. She had graphite smudged along one hand from a sight sketch, and there was a latte in the cup holder she kept forgetting to drink. She leaned against my trunk while I loaded the bags. I got the municipal arts contract, she said, smiling in that full way she used to. The library annex project. They picked my design. I remember the smell of mulch from a display near the entrance and the hard, clean sunlight on the pavement. That's wonderful, I told her. Daniel pulled up halfway through that conversation. He got out, looked at the bags, then at her. You're still doing all that? He asked. She laughed a little. It's my job. He gave a short smile. It doesn't exactly have to be. At the time, I did not think much of it. Just a possessive little comment. Mildly irritating. Not uncommon. But later, I realized that moment mattered more than I understood. A week after the restaurant, I called Claire 3 times. No answer. I sent one text each morning and kept them short enough not to sound frantic, checking in. Thinking of you. I'm here, she replied. On the second day at 9:12 p.m. I know because I wrote the time down. I had already started a yellow legal pad on my kitchen counter, not because I wanted to live that way. Because writing things down turns panic into sequence. Her message said, I'm okay, busy week, love you. I saved it. Then I made coffee I did not want and stood at the sink, listening to the refrigerator hum while rain tapped against the back window. It occurred to me that her wording had changed over the last year. Fewer contractions, more neutral phrasing, like someone writing under observation. The second memory came to me 2 days later, while I was emptying the dishwasher. Claire at age 9, kneeling on the floor of our old den with pieces of balsa wood spread around her like a little drafting office. There was sawdust on the carpet and glue on her thumb. She was making a birdhouse from a kit Edward had bought her. "Why a birdhouse?" I asked. Without looking up, she said, "Because they need somewhere safe to land." I can still hear the tiny scratch of sandpaper in her hand. That memory arrived with such force I had to lean against the counter for a minute. That afternoon I called an attorney. Not because I was ready to sue anyone, because I needed to know what was real and what was only the shape of my fear. The woman I spoke to was named Andrea Sloane. Her office sat in a low brick building off Meridian Street. Nothing impressive from the outside. Inside, everything was orderly. Grey carpet, soft lamplight, a bowl of wrapped peppermints on the reception desk. Her assistant wore reading glasses on a chain and spoke in a voice so calm it lowered mine. Andrea listened without interrupting. I told her about the restaurant, the bruises, the way Claire had tried to manage me instead of him. When I finished, she folded her hands and said, "Without your daughter's participation, your options are limited." But limited is not the same as non-existent. That was the first true shift. She explained everything carefully. Civil protection orders, documentation, third-party witness statements, contemporaneous records, safe contact planning. She did not dramatize any of it, which I appreciated. She also did not comfort me with empty phrases. That helped more. "If she reaches out," Andrea said, "you need to be ready immediately, not emotionally ready, logistically ready." What does that mean? A place for her, a separate phone if needed, copies of key documents, emergency funds if you can manage it. And you do not push so hard that she stops viewing you as safe. I wrote that down exactly as she said it. Do not push so hard that she stops viewing you as safe. Then I went home and started making space. I cleared out the guest room closet. I put clean sheets on the bed. I found the extra house keys and put them in a ceramic bowl by the door. I opened a new checking account and moved a modest amount of money into it. Not an amount anyone would notice in a story title. Just enough to cover a motel, groceries, diapers if necessary, gas, a replacement charger, ordinary things. The things survival actually runs on. Pressure came quickly after that. Daniel called me for the first time in months. His tone was almost pleasant. "Margaret, I think we need to clear the air." I was standing in my laundry room with a basket of folded towels against my hip while he spoke. "There's been a misunderstanding," he said. "Claire's been really upset since dinner. Was she upset before or after you put your hand in her hair?" There was silence. Then a measured exhale. "You know, that kind of language is exactly the problem. You're turning marital stress into something theatrical." I looked down at the beige tile floor and the loose thread on one of the hand towels I had meant to trim. "If Claire wants to speak to me," I said, "she knows how. She needs some distance right now." "From me," he meant, "not from him." "Distance can be arranged," I said. "Control cannot." He hung up. The third memory surfaced the next Sunday in church, though I am not entirely sure why that was the trigger. Maybe it was the smell of lemon oil on old wood, or the way the morning light came through the stained glass windows. For a second I remembered Claire, as a little girl, leaning against my shoulder during sermons and whispering questions she was supposed to save for afterward. But the memory that settled in was her wedding. White roses, outdoor ceremony, late afternoon light through the trees. I had pinned her veil into place with my own hands while she stood in front of the mirror in the bridal room. "You happy?" I had asked. She smiled at our reflections and said, "I think so. I think this is it. Not this is him. Not this is right. This is it." Maybe I should have heard the difference. Maybe no mother hears it in time. By the second week after the restaurant, I had a notebook, screenshots of texts. Andrea's card on my kitchen bulletin board, and a feeling I could not shake that there was some part of the system I still was not seeing. That piece arrived through a gatekeeper. Her name was Elise, and technically she was only the front desk coordinator at Claire's old architecture firm downtown. Claire had left the firm 2 years earlier, officially to focus on family. I stopped by under the pretense of dropping off a holiday card I had forgotten to send. It was a clumsy excuse, but not entirely false. Offices keep their own memory of people if you ask gently enough. Elise remembered Claire right away. "Oh, we loved her," she said. "She was brilliant." Loved. Past tense. I asked if Claire had left happily. Elise hesitated. Only slightly, but I saw it. "She gave notice very suddenly," she said. "That's all I really know." I thanked her and would have left it there, but then she added, lowering her voice, "Her husband came in during the last week she worked here. Twice." I waited. He asked for access to her project files. Not in a screaming way or anything. He was very polished. But our operations director had to explain that client materials and internal drafts couldn't be released to a spouse without authorization. There it was. A rule, calmly read, quietly held. What did he say? Elise gave a small, uncomfortable smile. He said, "I'm her husband." And Martin, our ops director, said, "I understand that, but that's not the authorization clause." That line stayed with me. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was exact. "That's not the authorization clause." I thanked her, walked back to my car, and sat there with the engine off. It told me something important. Daniel did not only control by force, he tested systems. He leaned on assumptions. He expected his role to override process. That mattered, because process does not have feelings. It either allows something, or it does not. That evening, Claire called me. Actually called. Her voice was thin and hurried. "Mum, please don't go downtown asking questions." So he knew I had been there, or someone had told him. "All right," I said. "Then answer one question for me." Silence. "Are you safe right now?" A long pause. I heard a door close somewhere on her end. Then the faint sound of running water, as if she had stepped into a bathroom to speak. "I'm managing." That was not yes. "Claire," I said, "I'm managing." Then, softer, "Please don't make this harder." That was the pressure beat Andrea had warned me about. Every step toward the truth raised the cost for Claire, before it raised the cost for him. So I shifted. I stopped asking direct questions and started preparing around them. Part of that meant entering a place I never thought I would need. The county records office. Marion County. Fluorescent lights, low ceilings, rows of public terminals, paper notices taped slightly crooked to beige walls. There is something almost comforting about government spaces when the employees know their work and do not mistake urgency for importance. I was looking for property records. Claire and Daniel's house sat in a gated development outside Zionsville. Large lot, stone facade, neat landscaping, the kind of home people assume means stability. I wanted to know how it was titled. That was all. The clerk who helped me was a woman in her 60s, with silver bangs and a reading lanyard covered in little blue beads. She asked which parcel I needed, typed quietly, then turned the screen slightly toward me. The house was not jointly held the way I had assumed. It was titled, "Through an LLC Daniel Controlled." I asked her to print the chain of filings. She did. I paid for certified copies. The paperwork already had his structure all over it. He had built the house of her dependents with legal walls she probably never read. That should have felt like progress. Instead, it made me angry in a cool, clear way that lasted for days. When I showed the documents to Andrea, she tapped one page with her pen. "This isn't just marital dominance," she said. "This is asset isolation. Can that be challenged?" "Yes, but not by you. By her counsel if and when she retains one." There was that phrase again. If and when. Then what am I supposed to do with this? Keep it, because when she does come in, you'll save us time. A few days later, the social lane opened without my asking for it. A neighbour of Claire's called me from a number I did not recognize. Her name was Paula Henderson. We had only met twice at birthday parties for my grandson, Owen. She sounded nervous. "I hope this isn't overstepping," she said, "but I thought you should know I've heard yelling there more than once." "Late. And your daughter?" "She started checking the street before she gets the mail." I stood in my backyard with the phone pressed hard to my ear. Cold wind moving the bare branches over the fence. "Would you be willing to put that in writing if needed?" She hesitated. "If it came to that, yes." I thanked her and wrote down the date, time, and her exact wording as soon as I went back inside. Financial lane, social lane, then financial again. I learned from one of Claire's old colleagues, through a conversation that began by accident and then turned more deliberate, that Claire still had a dormant professional license in good standing. Daniel had not erased that. He had only buried it under disuse. I paid the renewal fee anonymously through the state portal after confirming with Andrea that doing so was lawful and could not be construed as misuse. Since the system permitted third-party payment without representation, one of those small administrative details that seem meaningless until they are not. A license in good standing is not freedom, but it is a door that is not entirely sealed. Then social again. At a pediatric urgent care in Carmel, where my grandson had once been taken after a fall, a nurse I knew from church saw me in the parking lot and asked, gently, whether Claire was doing all right. She did not disclose anything improper. She did not need to. Her expression was enough to tell me. My concerns were not isolated to my own imagination. By then I had to be careful not to stack evidence actions too tightly. Every time I saved, printed, logged, or forwarded something, pressure seemed to return to Claire before relief ever did. So I paced myself. I did one thing. Then I waited. That waiting nearly undid me. Around Thanksgiving, Daniel invited me to dinner. That was the first thing that made me say no without explanation. There are invitations that are really summonses, and by then I had learnt the difference. Instead, I mailed a card for Owen with a book tucked inside and no commentary beyond "Happy birthday, sweetheart. Grandma loves you." 3 days later, the package was returned. No note, no explanation, just the shipping label marked refused. He had not expected that answer, though not about the package. About my refusal. Men like Daniel expect either emotional confrontation or submissive silence. Calm non-participation frustrates them because it leaves them with nothing theatrical to stand against. December came, then January. Cold settled into the edges of everything. Claire's messages became less frequent and shorter. "I miss you." That was one she sent on January 14 at 6:41 a. No context, no follow-up. I stared at it for a long time before replying. "I miss you too. House is ready whenever you are." No question marks, no pressure. Andrea had taught me that too. The institutional tightening began in a way almost too ordinary to notice at first. Daniel left me a voicemail threatening possible legal remedies if I continued interfering in his household. Andrea listened to it twice and said, "Good. Save that." Good? It establishes anticipatory intimidation. I wrote that phrase down too. Paula, the neighbour, called again after hearing what she described as something heavy hitting a wall one night around 11. She had not called the police because the noise stopped quickly, and she was afraid of making things worse if she was wrong. "You're not wrong," I said, before I could stop myself. Then I apologized for saying that and asked only whether she would document the date and time. She said yes. Andrea drafted a prepared emergency petition packet for Claire in advance. Not filed, not yet, ready. Protection order language. Temporary custody request language if needed. Affidavit placeholders, instructions clipped to the front. I kept the packet in a manila envelope in my desk drawer, next to my passport and homeowner's policy. That was the resolution mechanism, becoming visible long before the resolution arrived. Quietly, on paper, the social lane sharpened unexpectedly through Owen. A preschool teacher left me a voicemail after getting my number from an emergency contact form. Claire had not updated. She said only that Owen had started crying at pickup and saying he did not want to go home when Daddy was in a loud mood. She was careful, professional, not accusatory. But there are sentences that alter the temperature of a room even when no room is shared. I forwarded the voicemail to Andrea. Then I sat at my kitchen table and cried for exactly 3 minutes. I know because the microwave clock read 4:18 when I put my head down and 4:21 when I lifted it. After that, I washed my face, tied my hair back, and made soup, because ordinary motions are sometimes the only railing you have. By February, Daniel's tone had shifted. Not softer, more formal. Performance turning into procedural threat. Certified letter. Attorney letterhead. A warning against continued harassment and destabilizing contact. Andrea read it and almost smiled. What? I asked. He's trying to pre-frame you. Is that bad? It means he feels movement under him. We responded with exactly one letter. Polite. Narrow. No admissions. No apologies. No emotional language. It stated that I would of course respect Claire's wishes if communicated directly and freely by Claire, and that any future contact should be routed through counsel. Procedure does not bend. 3 days later, Claire called from an unknown number. I answered on the first ring. "Mum," she said, and then nothing for several seconds. I could hear her breathing. I think she was in a car. There was road noise, maybe turn signal clicks. "I'm here. I found the envelope." "What envelope?" "The one in your guest room closet." A shaky inhale. "The phone charger, the spare toothbrush, the copies of school forms. You made a place." I closed my eyes. "Yes," I said. She started crying, quietly, as if even then she was trying not to take up too much sound. I didn't know where else to go. That was the moment everything shifted, though even then it did not look dramatic. No midnight sprint through a storm. No broken window. No police lights in the distance, at least not yet. It was Tuesday, around lunchtime. The dishwasher was running. I had chicken thawing in the sink. Life never clears its calendar for collapse. "Where are you?" I asked. "In the grocery store parking lot. He's out of town until tonight. Owen's with me." "Drive to Andrea's office. Do you know where it is?" She said yes. "Don't come to my house first." I could hear the shift in her, the old practical part of her resurfacing beneath the panic. "Because he'll come there." "Yes. I have one suitcase. That's enough. And my folder." "What folder?" "The house documents, insurance cards, Owen's birth certificate copy, some bank printouts." She took a trembling breath. "And I brought my marriage license. I don't know why. Because your mind is working." When I reached Andrea's office, Claire was already there. She was sitting in a conference room, in a wool coat, both hands wrapped around a paper cup she was not drinking from. Owen was asleep, across 2 office chairs pushed together, with Andrea's suit jacket rolled under his head. Claire looked up when I entered, and for 1 second I saw my daughter as she had once been before all this. Alert, intelligent, ashamed of nothing except the fact that she needed help. Then she stood and folded into me so hard I had to brace my feet. No speech, no grand line, just her body shaking against mine, and my hand at the back of her head. Andrea gave us 5 minutes. Then she came back in with a yellow legal pad and said, "We need sequence." That was the kindest thing anyone could have said. Not tell me everything, not start from the beginning. We need sequence. Claire gave it to her. Haltingly at first, then with more coherence. Dates where she had them. Incidents where she did not. Financial control, surveillance cameras inside the house, restricted card access, confiscated phone passwords, public humiliation, hair pulling, wrist grabbing, pushing. One strangulation incident that stopped only because Owen began screaming, another because the nanny arrived early. There it was, the partial mystery resolving at last. The nanny. Her name was Tessa. Andrea tracked her down before sunset. By late afternoon, the lanes were moving together. Financial. Andrea filed the emergency protection petition and attached the LLC property records as contextual evidence of dependency and control, not ownership proof. She also instructed Claire to open a separate account in her own name and transfer only the amount clearly traceable to her existing personal funds and wages from the small freelance deposits Daniel had. Missed. Careful. Clean. Defensible. Social. Tessa gave a statement. Paula gave a statement. The preschool voicemail was transcribed. The returned birthday package was added, not as abuse itself, but as evidence of isolation. By evening, Daniel had called Claire 32 times. We did not answer. He switched to me, then to Andrea's office, then to unknown numbers. Performance, then anger, then bargaining. Texts about counselling, about misunderstanding, about Owen needing his father, about Claire being unstable, influenced, manipulated by outsiders. Andrea looked up at one message and slid the phone toward Claire. It read, "If you come back tonight, none of this has to become official." Claire stared at the screen for a long second and said, very quietly, "Authority doesn't come from saying something first." I turned and looked at her because the sentence was so precise, so unlike the frightened evasions I had been hearing for months. Andrea nodded once. "That is correct." That line stayed with me. The order was granted the next morning on an emergency basis. Temporary exclusive possession did not go to Claire because of the LLC structure and because Andrea did not want to trap her back inside a controlled property. Instead, the court granted no contact provisions, temporary custody parameters, and law enforcement accompaniment for retrieval of remaining personal items. Daniel's tone shifted exactly the way Andrea predicted. Performance to panic, panic to procedural compliance. He arrived at the retrieval with his own attorney, his jaw tight enough to show at the hinge, his expensive coat buttoned wrong at the bottom. He did not look at me. He looked at the deputies, at the paperwork, at the limits, at what the paperwork would and would not let him do. The principal was already in the room. Systems only honor what is written, filed, and enforceable. Not outrage, not status, not volume. Claire walked through that house with a deputy at her side and a banker's box in her arms. She took Owen's medical records, his favorite blanket, her passport, one photo album, a hard drive, and a framed pencil sketch she had made in graduate school of a reading room full of winter light. That nearly undid me. Not the jewelry she left, not the handbags, not the formal china, the sketch, the thing she had made before him. The financial lane tightened further in March. Andrea's forensic accountant flagged irregular transfers from an account Daniel had repeatedly referred to as household reserve. Several deposits had originated from Claire's old consulting income before she stopped working, then been rerouted through the LLC operating account. It was not the sort of figure that makes headlines, but it was enough to matter in court and enough to disrupt his narrative that he alone had built everything. He had not expected paper trails to keep speaking after Claire went quiet. Harold called me and said I was destroying a family. I stood in my garage holding a grocery bag full of canned tomatoes and said, "No, Harold, I'm refusing to decorate the ruin." He was quiet for the first time since I had known him. Susan called 2 weeks later. I almost did not recognize her voice because I had never heard it without him nearby. She asked if Claire was all right. I said yes. There was a long silence. Then she said, very softly, "I should have left years ago. I did not know what to do with that except receive it." Court moved in measured increments, the way it does. Hearing, continuance, affidavits, supervised parenting parameters, financial disclosures, nothing cinematic, mostly paper and chairs and waiting and the dull thud of doors closing in institutional buildings. But there was one moment I still return to. Daniel was on the stand during the temporary orders hearing, explaining in his careful executive voice that Claire had become emotionally volatile and overly influenced by outside pressure. He called me alarmist. He called Tessa opportunistic. He called the neighbor observations exaggerated. Then Andrea introduced the voicemail he had left me, threatening legal action before Claire ever left, followed by the returned package record, followed by the company file access inquiry from Claire's former firm, followed by one of the banking transfers labelled domestic support that had in fact rerouted Claire's own consulting funds away from her individual access. The judge did not raise his voice. He only asked, "Mr. Mercer, why did you require interior surveillance in multiple common areas of the home?" Daniel gave a long answer that never actually touched the question. The judge asked again. That was when the room went quiet. Not because of drama this time, because everyone in it understood the difference between a story and a record. By early summer, the orders had become less temporary. Claire leased a small townhouse in Carmel under her own name. 2 bedrooms, narrow kitchen, tiny fenced patio, close enough for Owen to keep his preschool, and far enough that she did not have to pass the old neighborhood unless she chose to. I helped her assemble flat-pack bookshelves one Saturday, while Owen lined up toy cars by color in the hallway. She wore jeans and an old college t-shirt with paint on one sleeve. Her hair was in a loose knot. There was flour on the counter because she had tried a new bread recipe and the loaf had come out uneven and heavy. "It tastes better than it looks," she said. I laughed, and for the first time in a long time she did too. Fully. Normal life does not return all at once. It returns in fragments. A grocery list on the refrigerator. A dentist appointment made without permission. A utility bill addressed to the right person. A child sleeping through the night more often than not. Bread that rises badly but honestly in a kitchen no one patrols. Daniel ended up complying because he ran out of angles. Not remorse. Compliance, supervised visits, financial disclosures, asset tracing, temporary support, counseling requirements if he wanted expanded parenting time. He obeyed because, in the end, the systems he had counted on being able to lean around were the same systems that finally held him in place. I would like to say there was a final speech. There rarely is. There was, instead, a Wednesday afternoon in late August, when Claire came by my house after a meeting with Andrea. She stood in my kitchen, opened the file folder in her hands, and said, "It's done enough to breathe. Not done forever. Not done cleanly. Done enough to breathe. We made iced tea." Owen chased a tennis ball across the backyard while the dog next door barked through the fence. The sun fell across the counter in that warm, late summer way that makes even old laminate look almost kind. Claire touched the bowl by the door where I had left the spare keys months earlier. "You kept them there this whole time?" "Yes." She nodded and looked out the window. "Some people mistake silence for permission," she said quietly. I dried my hands on a dish towel and leaned against the counter. "Yes," I said. And sometimes they learn too late that silence was only someone gathering her papers. That is how I remember it now. Not as one terrible night in a restaurant, though that mattered. Not even as the hearings or the filings or the inventory of bruises and bank statements and clauses. I remember it as the slow return of structure to a life that had been bent around someone else's need to dominate it. Truth did not arrive all at once. It emerged through sequence. Through records, through witnesses who finally said yes, through rules read calmly in rooms with bad lighting, through one woman deciding that help would not always feel dramatic when it was real. Claire still startles sometimes at sudden noise. Owen asks harder questions now because he is older. Some mornings are heavier than others. That part does not vanish because paperwork moves in your favor. But she works again, part-time to start, then more. Her license is active. Her name is on her lease. Her son knows what it looks like when adults speak without fear. Those are not glamorous victories. They are better than glamorous victories. They hold. And if stories about quiet boundaries resonate with you, you're welcome to stay. These days, when Claire comes over, she usually parks slightly crooked in my driveway because she is thinking about 6 other things at once. Owen runs to the porch before she has even shut the car door. I keep extra apple juice in the refrigerator and crayons in the drawer by the phone. Little systems, preventive systems, the kind that make ordinary life easier. Maybe that is all I ever really wanted for her. A place safe enough to land.